Hi guys, we need to talk about rhetorical analysis essay. Our goal in class has not changed. It always has been and always should be you earning a free college credit for English 101. There's no reason why you should not still be taking that goal very seriously. But we have an advantage now, and that is instead of having to practice 4 different skills, including multiple choice, which, face it, their multiple choice questions are boogers. Instead, we only have to practice one skill, and that's rhetorical analysis. But as I have been practicing using the new rules that are going to be put in place, I really have struggled a bit with rhetorical analysis. Now, let's start by talking about what the goal is. If this were a reading, see my screen? All those X's are words. If this is a reading, then my goal as the student is to read it and identify where there are patterns. So maybe I look at this and go, oh my gosh, troops, that's a very strong word to be using considering we're not talking about an army. And oh, wait, the coming march, that sounds rather army-ish. Ooh, rally the troops. Yep, campaign, totally, army, marshal the troops. Well, clearly this author is using very militaristic language. And so that's going to be one of the patterns I identify. Now, when we did this in paper, I could mark that in the margins. So right in the margin, I would, military image, military image, military image. And so I would have margin notes that would tell me this. Maybe I would look for another pattern, and I notice maybe the pattern of very painful sorts of diction or images. So the death of my father, deep sorrow, pain, and so rivers of regret. And so I would look at this and I would say, okay, well, now I've got 2 different patterns going. Those can become my 2 different body paragraphs. And so you would have to go back to that rhetorical triangle. Who is your speaker? Who is the speaker speaking to? Who's the audience? And how does this language help the speaker form this connection to better push that message that's the top of the triangle? And so I would really do this by using my margin notes. When I tried practicing the same skill using the computer, reading off the computer and then typing into the same computer, I found myself really struggling with that a little bit because I was trying to balance the reading and the writing on the same device. And I will tell you, I struggled. I tried a lot of different practices. And what I'm going to show you today is really the practice that I found that works best for me. If you have a different strategy that's working for you, I'm going to ask that you share it in comments, or that you come to office hours on Tuesday and that you talk through how you're doing it, because we need to really support each other and help each other out on this. So the first thing I do is I find I cannot read and write on the same device without getting into this weird kind of back and forth rereading loop that is going to get me in a world of trouble. Honey, stop. So what I use to sort of break that is a piece of paper. And what I found is if I stop and take notes on my reading, I can then more easily go from reading to notes and then shut the reading down, notes to writing. That's the pattern that is working best for me. Now, this does tend for me to be consistently reliable in terms of strategies and my ability to get an essay out within the 40 minutes. But I will tell you that the very first thing I needed to do was to draw some boxes. I randomly chose 6 because 6 seems to work well for me. Honey, stop. Because 6 seems to work well for me. Sorry, my dog. What can I say? This is why working at home is not ideal. It doesn't actually matter how many boxes. If you need more, you can grab another piece of paper. If you don't fill them all, it doesn't matter. But when I tried taking notes without drawing boxes first, what I found is that I tended to write notes too close together, and that I then had trouble distinguishing what I was grouping with what. If I started with boxes, it was really easy for me to say, okay, here are all the angry words, here are all the happy words. And so because I just had a box to drop it into, it was a lot easier for me to keep my notes separate. So are you ready to try this with an actual reading? So what I pulled out, and what I've been doing is I've just been pulling random AP tests from previous years and trying it out and seeing how it works. So this is, I don't even know what year this is from, but on June 11th, 2004, Margaret Thatcher, former Prime Minister of Great Britain, delivered the following eulogy to the American people in honor of former United States President Ronald Reagan, with whom she had worked closely. Read the eulogy carefully. Then, in a well-developed essay, analyze the rhetorical strategy that Thatcher uses to convey her message. So we don't know the message. We're going to have to decide that. That's going to be the top of the rhetorical triangle. We have lost a great president, a great American, and a great man, and I have lost a dear friend. So we start right off with sort of that great American, great president. So a great president, a great American, and a great man. And I have lost a dear friend. In his lifetime, Ronald Reagan was such a cheerful and invigorating presence. Wow, that's okay. Cheerful, that's strong. And invigorating. And it also stands out to me because I wouldn't say cheerful is the first word that people would use to describe the president who led us through the falling of the Berlin Wall and the Cold War. But okay, cheerful. He was such a cheerful and invigorating president that it was easy to forget what daunting historic tasks he set for himself. Again, that's a very strong phrase. But if you notice, I have sort of, okay, positive words about Reagan. I then go into this, okay, this is, yeah, it's still positive, but it's a little bit different. He's cheerful and invigorating. Okay, cheerful, that's positive, but a little bit weird. So I separated it out. If things seem to be a little bit separate even, I find it's best to separate them because it's easy to then say, okay, look, these are all positives. Let's write about these together. It's harder if you put things together to later separate them back out. So go ahead and separate. But now I've run into daunting historic tasks, which again is a very strong phrase, but it has nothing to do with this. So I'm going to drop down into a completely new box because that would seem to be one of his challenges. A daunting historic task. So I now have just 3 little boxes. If I need more, I can grab more. But my guess is at some point we're going to start doubling up a little. He sought to mend America's wounded spirit, to restore the strength of the free world, and to free the slaves of communism. Wow. Okay, the slaves of communism, that would be very strong. And this time, I'm not starting a new box. The slaves of communism, the daunting historic tasks, these seem to be obstacles he's overcoming, so I'm going to start grouping them. These were causes hard to accomplish and heavy with risk, yet they were pursued with an almost lightness of spirit. Lightness of spirit. Which of these does that seem most like? Yeah, I'm going to go, that is up there with that cheerful. Lightness of spirit. For Ronald Reagan also embodied another great cause, what Arnold Bennett once called the great cause of cheering us all up. Okay. His policies had a freshness and optimism. Again, this is really standing out because Ronald Reagan is normally thought of as, the Cold War, standing up against, Gorbachev, the Berlin Wall falling. He's normally thought of as a much heavier president. And she's bringing in a rhetorical description here that's definitely not what I would expect. So that's really what's standing out. So freshness and optimism, I'm putting it with lightness of spirit. By the way, this goes way faster when I'm not trying to talk you through what I'm doing. Freshness and optimism that won converts from every class and every nation, and ultimately from the very heart of the evil empire. Okay, that's definitely another of his obstacles. So we will put that down in box 3. Yet his humor often had a person beyond humor. In the terrible hours after the attempt on his life, his easy jokes gave reassurance to an anxious world. Okay, we're back to what I said to you earlier. Okay, easy jokes would seem to fit up here, but here this is all sort of lightness. Now we're getting into something a little bit different, which is easy jokes for anxious world. It's bringing positive and negative together. So I'm going to drop that down a box. And so this will become kind of his lightness versus the world's heaviness. No, you don't have to label what the boxes are right now. In fact, I would encourage you not to label the boxes, but I'm feeling like that doesn't quite fit in with the freshness and optimism. It's easier to just separate it if you have any inkling that it might need to be separated. So, easy jokes gave reassurance to an anxious world. Now, the other really nice thing here is I don't want to copy a ton of stuff. It's going to eat up all my time. And so if you notice, what I'm getting are smallest possible phrases, which is awesome because the whole goal of rhetorical analysis is to pull in those little tiny quote fragments from different places and pull them together. So these notes kind of force you to do what you should do. So I'm thinking that this is possibly a better way to write a rhetorical analysis. So this might end up being a win-win in terms of your ability to succeed on the task. Okay, they were evidence that in the aftermath of terror and in the midst of hysteria. Okay, I'm going to put terror, hysteria, because those are obstacles he had to overcome. And you notice one-word quotes. One great heart, at least, remained sane and jocular. Okay. So I pulled hysteria into the box with the, here's what he has to overcome. But if the whole phrase also seems to fit here in, he's light when the world is dark. So I'm going to put it in both. Okay. In the midst of hysteria, ... because I'm going to skip some stuff because, again, copy as little as possible. Remained sane and jocular. They were truly grace under pressure, and perhaps they signified grace of a deeper kind. Ronnie himself, Ronnie. Which of these boxes would the name Ronnie seem to go into? Yeah, Ronnie, Ronald Reagan, that has power. Ronnie is definitely coming off as much more cheerful, lighter, fresher. So I'm going to put that up there. The very fact that she calls him Ronnie. Certainly believed that he had been given back his life for a purpose. As he told a priest after his recovery, whatever time I've got left now belongs to the big fella upstairs. And surely it is hard to deny that Ronald Reagan's life was providential when we look at what he achieved in the 8 years that followed. I sincerely hope you guys are not trying to do the AP test with reading glasses, but if you do, make sure you have good reading glasses. Others prophesied the decline of the West. He inspired America and its allies with renewed faith in their mission of freedom. Okay, renewed faith. Now we're getting into what is a much more traditional image of Ronald Reagan, that renewed faith, mission of freedom. I'm going to drop those phrases into a new box. Others saw only limits to growth. He transformed a stagnant economy into an engine of opportunity. Oh, danger, Will Robinson. Danger, Will Robinson. We are almost halfway through this. Now, that is a beautiful phrase. Others saw, I'm sorry. Oop, I just lost it. Of course, I just lost it. Where is it? There you go. He transformed a stagnant economy into an engine of opportunity. And you can look at that and go, oh my gosh, that's beautiful antithesis, or not antithesis, it's beautiful parallel structure and antithesis, actually, when I look at it. But here's the danger. The whole purpose of a rhetorical strategy is to look at how a speaker is connecting to an audience and how that pushes a message. Do not get caught up by technique. There is no box on here for antithesis. Don't do that. What you are looking for is like ideas go together. That right there, okay, stagnant economy, we can certainly put under one of the obstacles he had to overcome. But we don't want to get overly focused on a beautiful phrase and forget that the goal is to figure out how Margaret Thatcher is using language to push her message. Is her message focusing on the economy? No. Then don't get overly focused on one phrase just because it's beautiful. So I will pull that in as stagnant economy. But I am not going to write that whole phrase down. Okay. Others hoped at best for an uneasy cohabitation with the Soviet Union. He won the Cold War, not only without firing a shot, but also by inviting enemies out of their fortresses and turning them into friends. Enemies out, I can't write, of fortresses. And turning them into friends. Now, that phrase is not as rhetorically beautiful, but it's more significant to what our overall message is. Focus on the message, not the techniques. Okay. I cannot imagine how any diplomat or any dramatist could improve on his words to Mikhail Gorbachev at the Geneva summit. Let me tell you why it is we distrust you. Those words are candid and tough. Ooh, candid. Tough. Now, I find that interesting because earlier in the piece, we got a lot of fluffy bunny words up here that he's cheerful, invigorating, lightness. And now we're getting candid, tough. So that's an interesting contrast there to play with. And I lost myself again. Again, this worked a lot better when I'm not trying to walk you through it. No offense, guys. Okay. And they cannot have been easy to hear, but they are a clear invitation to a new beginning and a new relationship that would be rooted in trust. We live today in a world that Ronald Reagan began to reshape with those words. It is a very different world with different challenges and new dangers. All in all, however, it is one of greater freedom and prosperity, one more hopeful than the world he inherited on becoming president. As Prime Minister, I worked closely with Ronald Reagan for 8 of the most important years in all our lives. We talked regularly, both before and after his presidency, and I've had time and cause to reflect on what made him a great president. Again, we have that repetition of great president that we had in that opening. So it's very generic, but she's coming back to it. Ronald Reagan knew his own mind. He had firm principles. Ooh, that really goes with candid and tough. Firm principles. And I believe right ones. He expounded on them. He expounded them clearly. He acted upon them decisively. Acted, ... decisively. When the world threw problems at the White House, he was not baffled or disoriented or overwhelmed. He knew almost instinctively what to do. When his aides were preparing option papers for his decision, they were able to cut out entire rafts of proposals that they knew the old man would never wear. The old man. It's almost like his father image. Flipping over onto the back because I don't know where that fits. But we'll just put it here. And by the way, that's fine. There's not a magic number of boxes to have. So if it takes 8, take 8. So I just flipped it over. And again, I lost myself. When his allies came under Soviet or domestic pressure. Well, there you go with another obstacle. Soviet or domestic pressure. They could look confidently to Washington for firm leadership. And when his enemies tested American resolve, they soon discovered that his resolve was firm and unyielding. Wow, that definitely goes down with decisive. Yet his ideas, so clear, were never simplistic. He saw the many sides of truth. Yes, he warned that the Soviet had an insatiable drive for military power and territorial expansion. The Soviet drive. I got to put my finger on it because I keep losing where I am. You know, when I was just taking notes and not trying to talk to you, that wasn't happening. Okay, but that's okay. I can put my finger on the page. Drive for military power and territorial expansion. But he also sensed that it was being eaten away by systematic failures impossible to reform. Yes, he did not shrink from denouncing Moscow's evil empire. I already have evil empire. But he realized that a man of goodwill might nonetheless emerge from within its dark corridors. So the president resisted Soviet expansion and pressed down on Soviet weakness at every point until the day came when communism began to collapse beneath the combined weight of those pressures and its own failure. And when a man of goodwill did emerge from the ruins, President Reagan stepped forward to shake his hand and offer sincere cooperation. Sincere cooperation seems to kind of go back to that lightness of spirit, which is where we started all this. Because if you are cooperative, that kind of goes in with that optimistic, that cheerful, that Ronnie image. Nothing was more typical of Ronald Reagan than that large-hearted magnanimity. Okay, and again, we're back up in that fluffy bunny. And nothing was more American. Therein lies perhaps the final explanation of his achievements. Ronald Reagan carried the American people with him in his great endeavors because there was perfect sympathy between them. He and they loved America and what it stands for: freedom and opportunity for ordinary people. Now, this took a lot longer because I was trying to explain to you what I was doing. Typically, when I found that when I was doing it on my own, this took about 10 to 15 minutes, sometimes a little longer, which is actually a very, very doable time frame, especially since all my quotes are now broken up. In fact, my goal now is to decide, okay, what 2 ideas do I think are most significant rhetorically? And that is going to come down to Aristotle's triangle. Who is the speaker? Yes, it's Margaret Thatcher, but more than that, is she being prime minister? No, she's not speaking as prime minister. She's not speaking as this hard ass trying to speak truth. She is really speaking as an admirer. Who is she speaking to? Well, the people listeners to Ronald Reagan's funeral. So the question is, how is she building a relationship down here at the base of the triangle? How is she trying to reach out to the listeners? How is it that she's trying to connect with them? And what message is she pushing? Well, I think the message that she's pushing is pretty clear. It's pretty clear that what she's saying is that Ronald Reagan was a great leader. So if that's her message, this has to become the center of anything that we write. So what is she doing? So what is it that Margaret Thatcher is doing to try to convince the listeners that this is true? We need 2 elements because we're going to write 2 body paragraphs. If you really see that there are 3 good elements that you want to discuss, go for it. But I think when I look at this, I really see 2 things that I want to focus on. And believe it or not, even though we've got a lot of obstacles here, this is not where I want to center myself. What makes him so great? Well, it seems to me that it is the combination of this happy, lighthearted, fresh Ronnie and this tough, deal with problems, firmness Ronald. This seems to be where I'm going to have the heart of my paper. Now, I may pull in some of these quotes when I'm talking about why he needs to be so hard. I may pull in some of these quotes when I'm talking about how he's dealing with obstacles through the lightness of spirit. But these 2 boxes are going to be the centerpiece of my essay. And because I have the notes all done, this allows me to actually close the reading and then focus just on these quote fragments. I'm not going to get sucked into reading and rereading and going, oh my gosh, what's the best phrase? Oh, where's that phrase? Everything is on the page that I need. Could I write a better paper if I were to obsessively go back over the reading over and over again? Yes. Don't do that. I have 1 page of notes and I'm going. So that's how I set myself up for success. In the next video, I'll show you how to be successful. See you then. And turn off.